You came back. Good. This isn't the main story. It's one of the footnotes. The kind that people skip, even though it explains everything. You already know what a vampire looks like now. Capes, coffins, fangs, a neat wee rule book. But before Dracula, before novels, before cinema, vampire wasn't a creature. It was a fear. So tonight, we're opening that earlier chapter. Before Dracula, vampires weren't a single being with a single set of rules. They were a category, a label that people used when something about the dead felt wrong. Across Scotland, Eastern Europe, and much of Northern Europe, people didn't say, "That's a vampire." They said, "That one didn't rest. That one came back. That one is still taking from the living." The word vampire came later. The belief came first. In early folklore, the horror wasn't blood drinking. It was return. A dead person appearing again. A body that didn't decay properly. Someone who died but didn't stay where they were put. People feared bodies swelling instead of shrinking. Fresh blood around the mouth. Nails and hair seeming to grow. And corpses that looked well fed. Now to us, those are natural processes. But to them, it meant the dead were feeding. Not always on blood. Sometimes on breath. Sometimes on vitality. And sometimes on luck itself. The living weakened, and the dead stayed strong. That imbalance terrified people. Pre-Dracula vampires didn't live in castles. They lived in graves, in villages, in churchyards, right next to the people who feared them. Many stories don't involve dramatic attacks at all. Instead, the signs were subtle. Livestock failing, sickness spreading after a funeral, families wasting away one by one, or neighbours dreaming of the same dead person. The vampire wasn't stalking strangers. It was draining its own community. That's why these beliefs were so frightening. You couldn't just outrun them. You lived beside them. Not everyone was thought likely to return. Folklore was very specific about who became dangerous after death. People feared return if someone died suddenly, violently, by suicide, unbaptized, without proper burial, during epidemics, or while carrying unresolved guilt. In other words, any death that felt unfinished. Vampire beliefs weren't about monsters. They were about deaths that didn't make sense. This is where pre-Dracula beliefs differ most from modern vampire stories. People weren't hunting vampires for sport. They were trying to prevent return. That's why we see practices like burying bodies face down, weighing coffins with stones, placing iron or sickles over the neck, pinning clothing with thorns, or staking bodies to keep them still. These weren't acts of cruelty. They were attempts to enforce rest, to make sure the dead stayed dead. If prevention failed, then communities intervened. Graves were opened, bodies were examined, signs were interpreted. And when a corpse was believed to be feeding, the response was practical, not dramatic. Decapitation, burning the heart, reburial at crossroads, and scattering remains. These actions weren't about punishment. They were about containment. Stopping something that was already harming the living. When Dracula appeared, everything shifted. The vampire became aristocratic, seductive, individual, fictional. What was once a communal fear became a personal predator. Blood became the focus. Sexuality entered the myth, and rules became neat. But something was lost. The older vampire wasn't glamorous. It was familiar, domestic, uncomfortable. It was the fear that grief, disease, or bad death could leak back into daily life. Pre-Dracula vampire beliefs lasted because they gave people language. Language for epidemics, for grief clusters, for inherited illness, for trauma spreading through families, or for the feeling that something had followed you home. They were explanations in a world without medicine. And honestly, they weren't stupid explanations. They were human ones. So when we talk about vampires, remember this. They didn't start as monsters. They started as warnings about death that isn't settled, about bodies that aren't at rest, about grief that refuses to stay buried. Try not to think about it. We'll close this book for now. Good night.